In this episode, I've got 7 great ideas to change up your autumn photography. And if you're like me and you're struggling for some different ideas, then this should massively help you. Okay, let's go. So, it's easy to go along when all the autumn fall colours come out and see some amazing trees and go to a lake and take some reflections of those, or go to a massive big vista and see all the different colourful trees and take that photo and wait for some good light. And I've done lots of photography like that. But this year I wanted to do something different. I wanted to try different things. I sort of lost a bit of a motivation. I was dead excited, don't get me wrong, for autumn. I've spoken about it in many of my videos, but I wanted to try something different. And recently I went on a walk with my wife and Pebbles, and I tried some different things, and I thought that would make a really good video. So what I've done is I've put together 7 ideas that I found to try and take something a little bit different. Some of these you may already be doing, some of them might be really useful. So before we get into them, I want to talk about a polarizer. So I think this is and I've spoken about it so many times before, this polarizer is the one filter that I think you really need to get amazing autumn shots. It reduces the reflection on the leaves, it reduces the reflections on the water, and it massively increases the contrast of the colour. So if you haven't got a polarizer, even if you go and get a cheap one, go and get one. I think you'll find that it makes a really, really big difference. Okay, so let's get into the first tip. So number 1 is experiment with different lenses. And what I'd suggest is experiment with a long lens. You know, if you haven't got a really big lens like this 70 to 200, which is fantastic, then just go to the longer end of maybe your 24 to 70 lens and just get a little bit closer to the subjects. And I think you'll find that you'll pick out details that are more interesting and that you may not have seen in that bigger vista. Now, one top tip when you put your longer lens on is crank up the ISO to maybe 1600, and the f-stop down to 2.8. Now you're probably going to leave it at 2.8, but that means you can handhold it and just move around and take lots of different shots until you find something that you think is pretty good, and then you can place it on the tripod, reduce the ISO down, making sure you don't get any blurriness from the wind on the trees, and that means that it's much easier to compose something handheld, and then when you've got something and put it back on the tripod and reduce the ISO, then you're going to get a fantastic shot. But keep it at f2.8 or f4 or what the widest open f-stop is, because one, you'll let more light in, but more importantly, you'll reduce that depth of field. And these 2 images just demonstrate that really well. So if you look at the first one, where I had it on, I think, f8, then you can see that the background's appearing here, but on the second one, which is f2.8, then you've got some great bokeh on it, and it really separates those leaves from the background. Now, I'm going to talk more about this in some of my other tips coming up around backlight and stuff like that, but using that longer lens is a great way of really capturing closer in detail and capturing some things that you might not have otherwise seen with the other lens. Okay, my second idea is use backlighting. It's probably, I think, the most important thing in autumn photography is having that backlit leaf or that backlit tree, or just backlighting on leaves that are on the ground, and it makes such a big difference to the image. So if it's sunny, when you might not be going out taking those bigger vistas in the middle of the day, then you've still got in autumn a great way of going down into the woods and finding some great compositions. And again, with this backlit stuff, then you can use your longer lens on there, but you can also maybe just use a 50mm lens like I've got on here. This is a Sigma 50mm f1.4 lens. And again, having that small f-stop, that really wide open aperture, lets in lots of light, but also, more importantly, just creates amazing bokeh and really separates those leaves from the background. And you can create some fantastic effects from that. Now, when you get backlighting, you can often get some quite abstract images as well. One of my favorite images that I've taken recently is this one of the leaves. But you've got to think about your composition. So in this one, what I did was I took an image, and then I looked at it on the back of my screen actually, and I thought, I'm sure there's got to be a better composition here. After I'd seen it on the screen, I spotted an area of coloured leaves, and then I retook the image in a portrait orientation of those leaves. But the backlighting just creates a really good abstract image. But the backlighting itself, when there's dark subject behind, this one was in Zion National Park. It's actually not in autumn, but it demonstrates the benefit of having backlighting on leaves can separate the subject from the background. So in this case, I had backlighting on these two trees here that were entangled together, but the canyon walls were really dark, so it really separates the subject from the background. And that's something that I'm going to talk about a lot in these 7 ideas, because you really want to try and separate the subject from the background so everything just doesn't become too complicated, which can often happen when you're taking woodland scenes. The other image that I wanted to talk about was this one, which is a great idea of backlighting. I think this was taken in probably maybe mid-November, so a long time after you would normally associate with great autumn photos. But the backlighting on these leaves on the floor is what really creates some dramatic conditions for this image. And I hid the sun behind the tree so that I could expose it correctly and expose the foreground really well. So again, backlighting makes a really big difference to autumn photography. So the third idea is water. So doing something a little bit different than water. Now, I'm sure everybody's taken long exposures of water, of a stream, with some great autumn colours. Here's one that I took this year, in fact, which is okay. It's an okay image, but trying to be a little bit different with water is, I think, a good idea. Now, with water, it's probably a good idea to look at how the stream's flowing, because what you will probably find is that there are areas at the side where you get swirls of water and patterns that emerge in those swirls when you create a long exposure. So the chances are that there's not going to be a lot of light and you're going to have a reasonably long exposure. Now, for great swirls of water, you probably want something between 5 and 15 seconds where you're going to get a really good pattern in the water. Now, here's one that I took, but I didn't immediately spot this swirl. And then I took a photo and saw it and then recomposed the image to include the swirl at the top of the image. Again, it's not a fantastic image, but it demonstrates the point. It adds something just a little bit different. So by looking for things in a little bit of a different way, rather than just having the water flowing over the rocks, then you can often find more interesting ideas for autumn photography. And the leaves, the colourful leaves as they swirl around, can create colourful patterns as well. The other thing to mention whilst I'm talking about water is the iPhone. So I've had an iPhone for ages, but we've never been able to do long exposure on it very easily. It's inbuilt now in the iPhone, so you can go on, as long as you keep the iPhone steady, so holding it on a bridge or something like that, you can take a live photo and then you can convert that into a long exposure. So now, even with an iPhone, you can either take a great photo in the woods of moving water, or you can just use it as a way of seeing what something looks like. I was just holding the phone up and just taking photos. Everything ended up a bit blurred, but it gave me an idea of what was swirling and what wasn't. It's a really great tool to quickly look at your photos before you get your camera and your tripod out. Okay, the next idea is shoot through things. So it's a really good way of creating different compositions by shooting through trees or through leaves. It helps to frame the image and create a better composition and lead the eye to a particular subject. So look out for things whilst you're walking that you can shoot through that might be out of focus. So here, the stream, rather than just taking the stream, then I shot through these oak leaves at the bottom of the image here and had some other leaves at the top of the image that I was shooting through to the stream, which then, without that, I'd have had some leaves in the stream that would have, depicted autumn, but these colourful leaves at the bottom of the image make it really clear, it's evident that this is an autumn shot, and it adds a lot of contrast to this image as well, which I'm going to come on to. And here's another image. So I shot through some fir trees here because I saw this tree that was just changing colour in the middle, this deciduous tree. And I could have just shot that on its own, but I shot through a tree to it, and I just think, again, it just adds an element to the image by shooting through things to that ultimate subject. So it massively can help with composition when you shoot through other things to create that whole image. The fifth idea that I've got to improve your autumn photos is to think about colour contrast. So I often find it's good to have quite a lot of neutral colours in when you've got a very colourful autumn scene. So I've got a few images here that sort of show that idea. So the first one is a shot of some aspens when I was in Tahoe in California. It's a classic shot. This isn't the best shot. Again, I've just picked this out to give you an idea of what you can do. But I think what makes this image, what makes this is the contrast between the yellow and the sort of silvery bark. So, and again, that same contrast is seen in this other one in Yosemite, where I've got the real yellow tones, autumn tones at the bottom of the image, but the grey granite rock in Yosemite really contrasts well with that really colourful leaf at the bottom of the image. And again, I was in the Lake District and the slate quarries earlier. You probably saw my last two videos, and this was an image I took of some of the leaves, and to separate these leaves from the background, then what I did is I had the slate quarry as the background, and that grey and that yellow and greeny colours really contrast well together and brings out the colour in the image. So being able to pick something out that's more of a neutral colour as a background, or to contrast against those autumn colours, can create a really strong image. Okay, the next idea is get close in with a macro lens. So if you've got a macro lens, or if you haven't, then you can actually do it quite well with your iPhone. Then get down low and maybe think of things on the floor that you can find that you can take with a macro lens. Now, what you'll find with a macro lens is you get a hugely shallow depth of field. And that can massively help to create a very abstract type image. So this is, I just saw a few drops of water on this leaf on the floor, and it looked like nothing when I saw it. So I got out the macro lens, put it on. I actually just rested my camera on the floor to take this image, and even use a tripod, because it's often difficult to mess about with your tripod and whatever. Just rest it on the floor, or just take a beanbag, a little beanbag along with you, and just put it on that beanbag. But it creates something very different. I think the brown tones of this image, just brown all the way through, just look fantastic. And it's, again, just looking for those different things around autumn that are away from the just standard trees, big vistas, etc. Okay, the final idea that I've got is something that I think's really amazing, actually. I think not enough people do this with their cameras to create something that's very abstract, and that's intentional camera movement. Now, you've probably seen some photos like this. There's some great photographers that only do in ITM, as it's called, but it's really easy to do. And where it works really well is where you've got different colours in a scene, and where those colours are going to interact when you move the camera. So what intentional camera movement is basically getting the camera and then just moving it when you take the shutter. So you're just moving the camera in whatever way. You might move it round, you might move it left to right like this. The best way to do this is reduce your ISO as low as it'll go, and then control the shutter speed with your f-stop of your lens. Make sure something's in focus. It still is important to have something in focus. And I find it works best around about between 1/5 of a second and maybe 1/30th of a second. And then just move it. You will have to take a lot of photos to get something good. But this is one that I took of a scene that didn't actually look that great. It was a tree with some great brown leaves at the bottom. By adding some intentional camera movement in it and just moving the camera down, I managed to create something that was more abstract. And I actually really love this image. I think it looks fantastic. I think it really depicts the mood of the day. And actually, if you squint when you look at this image, then you can start to make out a little bit more of what the image might be. I'm actually going to do a video all on intentional camera movement in a few weeks, so watch out for that. And yeah, get out with your camera and try something different. Don't just stick with the standard vistas or the things that you do all the time. Go and try something different. Even if it's not these 7 ideas, think of something else to do. Try a different lens on your camera. If you haven't got a polarizer, go and get a polarizer. It will make a really, really big difference. Yeah, and I'd love to hear your ideas. What do you do in autumn to create different images? Have you got any great ideas? So share them below. We've got a great community here now on this channel of lots of people sharing their ideas and what things that they do with their cameras. So share your ideas for autumn photography and try and let's see if we can get some really unique ones below. Thanks ever so much for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye.